special council meeting. Special or not, we still have to run through this protocol every week, so I'll read it through. All visitors must sign into the visitor book at the entrance to Kilncraigs. This includes council staff from other buildings. There are no planned fire evacuation drill or alarm tests for today. If an alarm is activated during your visit, you must exit the building immediately. Council officers will direct you to the nearest fire exit and will escort visitors to the building fire assembly point beside the Silver Man at the top of Parliament Walk. Kilncraig staff should report to their floor's assembly point. You should remain at your assembly point until directed to reoccupy the building and only re-enter once the fire marshal is advised it is safe to do so. Please do not attempt to leave the site by vehicle until cleared to do so by the fire marshal to ensure that access routes are kept clear for emergency vehicles. Please note it's a public meeting and that members of the public may be in attendance. The meeting will be recorded by the clerk and published online for public viewing. And the taking of photographs, screenshots, audio or video recordings are not permitted during the meetings, unless with the express permission of the convener. If members have not been able to access all papers for the meeting, could you please indicate? Okay. We will hear each of the items set out in the agenda and I will invite officers to present the papers. Members will then have the opportunity to ask questions before we proceed to debate and decision. We've got two apologies this morning from Councillor Holden and Councillor Keogh. Do we have any declarations of interest for any matters on the agenda this morning? No? Okay, thank you. So we'll move straight on to the agenda then. The first item is the Budget Context and Outlook report by the Section 95 officer. Lindsay will take us through that.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Council. I prepared this report in my role as Section 95 officer in consultation with the Chief Executive and the Monitoring Officer, which is intended to be read alongside the Council's General Services Revenue and Capital Budget for 26-27, presented later on today's agenda. Its purpose is to provide a clear understanding of the wider financial context, resilience considerations and long-term sustainability challenges facing Clackmannanshire, as Council today prepares to take its budget decisions. The report places service and financial sustainability at its core and describes the challenging operating environment in which Clackmannanshire, whilst the smallest mainland authority by population, faces levels of demand, deprivation and complexity that significantly exceed what population-based funding allocations recognise. As set out in the report, our small scale, the intensity of our need in our communities and structural economic barriers compound the pressures on service delivery and financial sustainability. The report also outlines the Council's financial position and outlook, highlighting that since 2010 the Council has delivered savings of £74 million, which is a significant sum relative to the current revenue budget of £176 million. These savings have required difficult decisions across many service areas, widening the challenge of identifying further efficiencies without impacting our statutory and frontline provision. The report also emphasises that despite extensive partnership arrangements, substantial innovation and significant leverage of external resources in recent years, the Council continues to face a projected funding gap estimated at £23.8 million over the next 5 years ahead of setting this budget. This underlines the structural nature of the financial challenge ahead. Accordingly, the Council must maintain a strong focus on delivering permanent reductions in expenditure and recurring increases in income, in line with the medium-term financial strategy that was approved by Council in June 25. The strategy in this report make it clear that one-off measures such as the use of reserves or non-recurring savings cannot support long-term financial sustainability and should therefore be minimised. Equally, the report stresses the importance of targeted investment and activities that support medium to long-term sustainability. This includes continued progress on the Be the Future transformation programme, the target operating model, collaboration with neighbouring councils, digital and data transformation, and income maximisation. Section 5 of the report sets out these priority activities and invites Council to identify any further additional options wishes to explore. So I hope this context is helpful as Council considers remaining budget papers on today's agenda. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. Do we have any questions for Lindsay? Councillor Corson?
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm looking at page 11 of the budget context paper, and there's a little paragraph there about increasing demand for services, and a little bit about the impact that has on the budget setting. I wonder if you could provide a wee bit more context and maybe some examples. It might not be you yourself necessarily, maybe from the service, about where we are facing increasing demand for services, the impact that has on the finances, and in particular areas where you've got static funding, you don't get increased or improved levels of funding. And if we add that in, because I think it fits nicely to the national policy context, areas where we're asked to deliver policies, but we might not necessarily get the funding that we need to deliver it. And I'm asking this because I think it's important that any members of the public who might be listening to that or maybe understand that a wee bit better.
Thank you. Yes, there are a number of areas where we receive funding to carry out priority services that don't necessarily meet the needs of the cost of that provision. And in terms of the allocation and distribution of the funding, it tends to be quite general, so not specific to the council's own needs and how that cost relates back to us. So I've mentioned a couple there, like homeless and education and childcare in there. I'm wondering if my colleagues would be able to come up and give any further context. But when we do see the funding come through, it tends to be flat funding. It doesn't get inflated for many of these areas. So our costs are going up by inflation for the pay award, for general inflation costs, but the funding that we receive from government doesn't keep in line with that.
Lindsay, thank you, Chair. Just give a couple of examples, Councillor Forson, in response from the People Directorate in particular. We do get funding for additional support needs. We have had additional funding from the government for additional support needs, but the demand and complexity that we face in Clackmannanshire around additional support needs far outweighs the amount of money that we get for that. If you think about even just transport for children getting back and forward to school, children who have additional support needs, many of them need specific transport that with an escort. Those costs are very high and have been inflated over the last few years. So that far outweighs the amount of money that we get to make sure that those children can get to school, and they can benefit from their learning in terms of learning assistance and supports at school. Another area would be children's social work. The Promise in particular absolutely has introduced a lot of improvements in Scotland, and we are very ambitious in Clackmannanshire to make sure that our care experienced young people and children and their families get the support they need. But we've had a limited amount of additional funding to cope with the additional demands of the Promise. We look after our children very well in Clackmannanshire if they're in care. We try to anyway, but there are always situations where families find it really difficult, and we've had to look at external placements at times, and the cost of those external placements far exceeds the amount of money that we get for that particular policy area as well. So that's just two examples. I could go on.
Thank you, members. Just to add to the feedback that Lorraine's given there as well, one of the other key areas within my own portfolio would be in terms of homelessness and the receipt of housing benefits. When we host or place someone in one of our own accommodation, we get full cost recovery through the housing benefit allocation. However, because of the level of demand that we are seeing, and there is a crisis across the sector in that sense, we're having to place people out with our properties, of which we only receive a fraction of the cost involved, and this has led to quite sizable deviations from what we receive to what we pay out. And there's other areas within the portfolio, if I think about our roads infrastructure and what we receive is the grant in terms of what the need is, given the fact that there's a heavier use on our roads. Now it's very common that people have more than one vehicle at the home, then the cost to actually repair and maintain our roads is way exceeds the level of investment that we receive as a council in order to take that forward. And that's where it makes it really difficult in terms of prioritisation. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to add one point as well, if that's okay, for the council leader's question, which is to do with the difference between how we're funded for our core and how we are funded for some of the national policy priorities. A number of the policy priority funding pots come as specific one-off funding pots. Sometimes those are baselined in future years, but that is when we find ourselves in the situation that Lindsay described, where the amount is actually baselined and is not increased by inflation. What that means is we've got an issue with, even if we make the changes to implement those revised policy ambitions, we have a difficulty sustaining them because we aren't necessarily funded to meet the costs of that going into the future on a recurrent basis.
Thank you. Amy MacDonald, Chief Finance Officer with Health and Social Care Partnership, for those that I haven't met before. In respect of funding coming from government. In respect of funding coming from government, we get provided with an uplift for the real living wage increases. This year, the funding falls slightly short of the increase that we'll actually need. In addition, we have further pressures coming through from just the continued demand on services, and the ability to try and keep up with that within the funding that we have hasn't increased to the level of demand that we're now seeing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forson.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for those answers. I think there's a good range of examples there. I wonder, Lindsay, if you could just clarify what options the council then has to continue funding these services. You know, there's very important services there that we just can't stop providing. So when the funding falls short, what option does the council have to continue to fund them?
Thank you. So when the council has to consider what options it has, it looks across all the services it delivers. It needs to look at what are statutory functions that it needs to provide and the level of service within that. So the only way that it can look to increase the funding on certain areas is to reduce the funding for other areas that are maybe important to the local community but don't fit that statutory service provision or the priority that's been set through the Scottish Government's budget. So that's the only way. The other ways is to increase its income. And unfortunately, Clackmannanshire has got limited ability to raise income. The levers that are available to some of the bigger councils, such as the visitor levy or the parking charges, are not something that Clackmannanshire can benefit from. So council tax is one of the options that the council has to raise its income. However, 1% of council tax, as you know, is only equating to 289,000. The other is to maximise any other funding that it can from partners or philanthropic arrangements which are being pursued through transformation and the investment strategy as well.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Coyne, followed by Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it's same topic basically, same page, and it's one of my sort of bête noire is the HSCP multi-year sustainability risk. I mean, this is classic tail wagging dog, and I get quite concerned about that. Usually these things should be discussed on the basis of, here's the money we've got, what can you do for that? And the response is, well, we can do that, we need to do a bit more, well, we can afford that, if we can't afford that. So in other words, we go into the thing, everyone agreeing what will be done and what it will cost. So to be presented with an £11 million overspend at the end of a year is monstrous. And to expect that I understand that the risk is substantially similar for the next year again. So we're in a preposterous situation here where we've lost control of our finances. And what I'd like to know is what can be done to rebalance this, the power in this discussion, because it's gone all one-sided. I'm sorry, Amy, this is your first time in the council and you're walking straight into this one, but it's been bugging me for a long time. Nothing personal, I assure you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, yeah, as you can see in the paper, it sets out the projected overspend for the 25-26 position, and that is a recurring position. There was an overspend in 24-25, and that, unfortunately, as Amy had described in the response to the previous question, there is very little additional funding that comes forward to meet the increasing demands and the costs that come with that. for service provision. So that is driving a majority of the overspend, that the funding is just not there to support that increased demand. And that then rolls over into the next year, so 26-27, we have that recurring potential overspend. Now, whilst there is quite a high level savings programme being put in place, it needs to ensure that the delivery of those savings are achieved to bring down the overspend. And I think one of the key areas for 25-26 is that delivery plan has not been fully met to achieve those savings. So that is again carried forward in 26-27. So it then provides a challenge again in 26-27. So you've got the recurring demand pressures plus the inflation on pay, which is not covered from a local authority perspective, plus that overspend position, increase in demand. I'll just ask Amy if she wants to come in and add in.
Yeah, certainly it's a very demanding position, but it doesn't mean that we can't do things about that. As Lindsay outlined, we have got a structured savings plan that we'll have for next year, and we probably need to look beyond that as well to see what further can be done, because we fully appreciate the pressure that it puts on all partners' budgets as we lead into the next year. There's learning from other social care partnerships around Scotland that we can implement as well that we haven't done to date. So I don't sit in a position of not being optimistic about the future. I think there are definitely things that we can do to maintain our statutory services, to make sure that people protect those frontline services from the budgets that we have. But it is really important that the whole Health and Social Care Partnership team are fully aware of what the challenges are for the next year. We'll pull together as a team to minimise the exposure that we currently have.
If you wouldn't mind just staying there for a second, I'm going to ask you a follow-up to that. So do you accept then that there are going to be situations where you cannot do what you want to do?
I would say it's really important that we protect our frontline services. We must be very conscious of that as we go through the year. It's important that we spend our money wisely and that we spend that in the areas of highest need. And where the need isn't as high, we have to make the decisions, as Lindsay was saying, around the services that we are duty bound to provide and those that we don't have such a high obligation over. That's how we're going to have to manage our spending over the next 3 years, certainly.
Okay, so I can take it then that you're going to strive to balance the budget and not overspend.
I think it's really important that when we present our budget, we try and present a balanced picture. We explain what that means. And balance is about spending less money. We will have budget savings plans that we're going to bring forward. We would intend to have other options as well. Whether they're all implementable at this stage is something that we'll have to look at. But Section 95 officer position is that we need to present a balanced budget. So there will be that intention. Whether we can deliver to that is a completely different position that we have to discuss with our clients.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, leave that. We're sticking to the ball for the moment. The pay award, just again for the benefit of any public who are listening, what control does the council have over the extent to which pay awards affect the budget?
Thank you. So the pay award is set nationally through negotiations through trade unions and COSLA in consultation with leaders, council leaders as well. So proposals are put forward by trade unions and taken forward, and further proposals are put through COSLA and council leaders. So that negotiation process happens. So there's sort of the collective response in that, and it can be funded by the Scottish Government. They have stepped in the past and funded any additions to that. But there is some involvement from council leaders.
In summary, then, how difficult is it for you as a projecting officer to project what these increases might be and the impacts that will have on our budget?
Extremely difficult. I'll just say that. So we have fortunately had a 2-year pay deal, which has been helpful in terms of planning. So we knew going into 26-27 what the pay arrangements were for teaching and non-teaching. That also brings a different dynamic when you have two categories of staff that have two different pay awards that can be set. So a 2-year pay deal has helped in terms of planning, but unfortunately the timing of pay awards in recent years have been quite far into that current year. So when we're setting our budget, we have to provide an estimate, and all we can do is go by previous trends, looking at inflation, but also what is affordable for the council. So it's very difficult for us to put an assumption in that it's not affordable. And even of a 3%, which we put in the past, is a stretch to be affordable. We had considered the Scottish Government's public sector pay policy, which was an average of 3% over 3% over 3 years in the past, but obviously that's been above that for 25-26 and for 26-27. So it is very difficult for us. We have discussions through Directors of Finance with COSLA representatives and Scottish Government as well, but we don't have any influence or input into that other than providing the figures of what it would cost if there was something presented. If the pay award was X amount, what would that cost for your council?
Many thanks for that. Yeah, one more, if I may, convener. 5.11 is talking about the Section 95 also, your good self, Lindsay, undertaking a review of the council's arrangements for completing and submitting its local finance returns. Just wondered how that was going. It says had requested, but I rather suspect that should be has requested. Is that the case? Because otherwise we'd have done it.
Possibly has requested. Apologies for that. So that was something that, as the paper sets out, the Chief Executive has asked myself and the team to look at going forward. So unfortunately, we've not been able to carry that out during 25-26, but it is on our work plan for 26-27, as we find it's quite a key piece of information that drives the allocations that we get from the Scottish Government. So as the paper sets out, we're going to look internally to review our own processes and then engage with Scottish Government officials that are experts in this area to see if there's areas where we are need to review how we categorise. So we'll be looking to take that forward in the next coming year.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got a number of members who are looking to ask questions. Councillor Lee to be followed by Councillor Rennie.
Thanks, convener. This paper is really good at sort of setting out the difficult position that Clackmannanshire finds itself in. Obviously, we get to see a lot of detail behind that as we go through the years. But my sort of question was around when we challenge large bodies, governments, what sort of response and feedback are we getting to this difficult position that we're setting out to them that we're in? And are we being heard when we're going toe to toe with the likes of Edinburgh Council, your Glasgow Council, where they have much more power to influence?
If that's okay, Councillor Lee, I'll start and then I would invite the leader to come in because it's the leader and I that have been leading on a lot of this work, if that's okay. So we've got really good productive relationships now with both officials and obviously through the political networks. The difficulty is that whilst I think we're being heard, I think what we have achieved is that there's now a very good understanding. And there's also an acceptance that's not necessarily of our making, the situation we find ourselves in, but there is a shortage of solutions. And I'm just being very, very direct about that. That's the situation we find ourselves in. We have been trying to suggest solutions, but we'll find that it's quite difficult to get traction. And it's probably a good point to hand over to the leader on that because some of it is not directly within an individual council's gift. So COSLA is quite important in that space too.
Yeah, I mean, happy to come in on this and just building on what Nikki says there. We have extensive engagement with both the Scottish Government and COSLA in relation to our situation in Clackmannanshire. Though I would say that there are significant areas of uniqueness to Clackmannanshire, usually around our size and the demand on services. other councils across the country are facing the exact same issues that we are here, particularly around areas of demand in relation to social care and additional support needs and, all the kind of poverty related issues. So we're not alone in that. And I think there's a perception perhaps out there that somehow Clackmannanshire's this big outlier, but we're not. We face the same challenges as other local authorities. Although I would say it is difficult because when you're having one-to-one conversations, particularly with ministers, they're very understanding. But the way that local government is set up is that changes must come through COSLA. So there are 32 local authorities in COSLA. Some are quite happy with the way things are, and some aren't. As always with membership organisations, they will always take a collective position rather than argue the case for one local authority. So that tends to be what happens. We go in and we have our discussions and we put across our situation, but when it comes to a vote on how perhaps funding formulas are agreed or the initiatives that are available to councils, it will go with the majority. So if the majority are quite happy, for example, the funding formula, and there's a mechanism called the floor, which it's supposed to even up the funding. So your stats go through the sausage factory and you're allocated an amount of money, and the floor is supposed to either add to that or reduce from that depending on your statistics. This year, for example, Clackmannanshire contributed, was it £2 million to the floor? So that money was taken off Clackmannanshire's budget and it was distributed to local authorities who would gain from the floor. So Edinburgh gained from the floor. But Edinburgh is a local authority who can raise millions from the tourist levy, who take in about £28 million a year in car parking charges. So for me, the floor doesn't necessarily work. But when it works for the majority of local authorities, you're not going to get any change there. So I think we have to keep on going. We need to keep on pushing forward in relation to areas that we think there could be changes. And again, when I've spoken to the Cabinet Secretary, and Nikki has as well, they're willing to look at it, but unless COSLA bring that forward, they're not going to look at it. I would say, though, that we have been very, very effective in lobbying, and that's resulted in Clackmannanshire receiving quite significant funding for initiatives. So we have received, £1 million for the transformation space. So that's going directly into communities. We've received significant funding to help the transformation work and the collaboration work with our partners in other local authority areas. And without that, we probably wouldn't be able to kind of take these initiatives forward. So there's swings and roundabouts, but I think all we can do is continue to make the case for Clackmannanshire, and I do think that we make it very well, and that is demonstrated by the additional funding that we do receive in different areas to support us here.
Sorry, just to add one final point to what the leader just said, because just in terms of that effectiveness of the lobby point, we were told directly that the information we had provided ahead of the current year's budget cycle was what had contributed to local government receiving an increased settlement. So it was because we were giving real examples of showing what our budget allocations actually are relative to the demand and spend in our area, and it showed the level of pressure that there was in the system. So those real examples are really powerful for the politicians to be able to see in Holyrood.
No, well done. Thank you. Appreciate the efforts.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie, to be followed by Councillor Martin.
Thanks very much, Chair. Actually, everybody's asked all my questions, so I'll just follow up with, I'll say it was another one, tick them all off, but just on that final point, because the floor was one that I was really concerned about, actually, because if you think about the 2 million size, how that would eradicate a lot of the cuts that we've had to make. So, and I totally get what you're saying, Ellen, in terms of the challenges with negotiations with larger councils who essentially want their piece of the pot. So, they're not going to argue for anything different. I was wondering really, like, in view of the fact that there is that position, and I know COSLA is a big organisation and they have their own structures, is there the chance to raise complaints or mediation if you feel as if you're falling short in some ways where we are detrimentally being affected by some of these things? Because, you know, it's a real challenge in terms of, I think that's always going to be a mismatch in terms of larger councils are going to have more influence, and it means smaller councils like us don't have that influence. And is there a way that is there any way around that at all? Because it seems it will be in this tradition every year.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Although it is like many organisations like yourself, it's a democracy. So you kind of go in and you have your discussions, and leaders will take a decision on it. What I would say is, though, we have been there's no complaints process or mediation process. It's kind of just done on the the kind of democratic basis. I would say, though, we have been doing significant work with COSLA in relation to putting forward a case for small councils. And that piece of work is progressing, not as fast as I would like it to, because there's obviously competing priorities. But that's where we're seeing small councils like Clackmannanshire need a statutory level of funding just to be able to deliver basic services. And we don't think that we get that. Whereas bigger councils have that kind of, I suppose, economies of scale. It costs them less to deliver a service than it costs us because there's more people. So we are progressing that piece of work. We probably need to pick up on that again, and I think Nikki and I have been talking about that over the last couple of weeks, just to try and push it on, because there is Holyrood elections, national elections coming up, and I'd be really keen that we have something to put on the desks of whatever new government is there, so when they're making their decisions, that it's front and foremost. But to answer your questions, there is no dispute process. It's like everything that's a kind of works on a democratic basis. It's the majority rule.
It sounds to me, sorry to be talking a bit, sorry. It sounds to me a bit undemocratic in terms of where you're really small, you don't have a voice.
Well, I would disagree, because you do have a voice. It's 32 councils round the table, and you've got there is only one person for each of those councils round the table, so you do have the same voice. However, when the system is set up that it either benefits or doesn't detriment the majority of those people, then you're not going to affect change in that, because you're in the minority that is affected by it. And I'd welcome if we're all in different political groups who engage with COSLA, and it would be really good to perhaps push this forward in our own political groups, so there's a wider understanding of that. And I'm not necessarily sure that that is the case.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
My question, it's about the Health and Social Care Partnership and potential reforms. Given that we seem to be responding to a perpetual crisis, how can it go on the way it is? And also, tap into Janine and Ellen's conversation or exchange there regarding reform of that. I mean, it makes sense. It's what you're saying. The majority are well off, and they didn't want the status quo to change. Is there no reform plans for there, or is that something like you say that should be put in the next Scottish Government?
Sorry. I was just going to say, just on the reform stuff, or the change, I don't think there's any option for any government other than to look at public sector reform. And I mean, that's a personal opinion, and it's a political view that public sector reform is going to have to be front and centre of absolutely everything. And again, it's a personal view, but they are going to look at how areas of great demand are funded, and have real conversations with people about the future of services. But that's way above our pay grades, I think.
Just to comment on the Health and Social Care Partnership, that the government are very aware of the position that many IGBs are facing across Scotland, And the Accounts Commission Audit Scotland have just today released a further report following up on one from 24-25. Oh, so I mean, there is very much an awareness there of the positions facing IJBs, and I can't comment on what that would lead to, but that information is out there and it's being produced. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, I think it's really important as we go forward that we don't carry on doing the same things. It's really very much upon us that we need to transform the way that we deliver services in an efficient and effective manner to make sure that we're focusing on our service users, people that are really looking for that service from us. We provide them with their needs in the most effective way.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Quinn.
Thanks, Kevin. Just want to touch on 4.3 about the reductions in senior management posts, because I think this is worth highlighting, because it's something that obviously when we get our consultations and when you see the general public response, they seem to think that we've got loads of easy low-hanging fruit of senior managers just sitting around doing nothing, and we've got loads of them in abundance. So can you maybe just expand on what our senior management posts are like, kind of, in terms of like a reduction and how we compare with other local authorities with that, please? Thank you.
I'll do my best, councillor. So some of you may have a longer memory than even I do on this one, but my next paper that I'm going to cover off on the target operating model talks about there was a significant management restructure in 2018 that took out significant numbers of senior management, equating to a saving of just over £750,000. If you put that in the context of the fact we're a small council, we don't have a manager to manage every individual service that we have. Our scopes for our senior management roles are broad. So typically people are responsible for more than one professional or technical service. In the paper that's coming on the agenda next, you'll see that actually, even though there's a minimal structural change proposed from that paper, it is actually looking to reduce senior management again. And the process of change that's set out in that paper actually talks about how we better align functions and our focus on outcomes so that we can have more streamlined arrangements that will ultimately lead to fewer people, but with clear remits over a longer period of time. So we are not awash with management capacity, I can assure you. I know that that is not the view. I hear it loud quite regularly, but we are very lean. If you look at benchmarking at activity, and we've done it across a number of the service areas now, we typically come out kind of lowest in Scotland for a number of things, even beyond the islands. So that's in terms of total numbers of staff and management posts. So again, it just demonstrates that we are an extremely lean organisation, which goes with being the smallest mainland authority, but also it has to be within the bounds of affordability. So just bringing it back to the purpose of this paper, that was part of the driver, let alone all the significant transformation activity we want to do.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. Yep. So if there are no other questions, thanks, Lindsay. Councillor Forson to move the paper.
Thanks, Convener. I'd like to propose a paper which sets out the financial and socio-economic landscape we face as we prepare to agree our general services and capital budgets for 26-27. The paper has been prepared by our Section 95 officer in consultation with the Chief Executive and monitoring officer. I think we know its purpose is clear. It's to provide us with a comprehensive understanding of the context within which our budget decisions must be made now and over the medium term. Members will know that Clackmannanshires unique position as Scotland's smallest mainland authority, coupled with some of the highest levels of socio-economic need and demand, presents financial pressures that significantly outstrip our capacity. We see this across indicators such as worklessness, child protection referrals, and complex needs, all placing demand on services that are essential to our communities. And I'd like to give another example. The latest population health statistics show that people in Clackmannanshire have lower healthy life expectancy than most other areas in Scotland. And that impacts directly on the demand in services across the council, particularly in our health and social care areas, and I think we need to be quite cognisant of that moving forward. At the same time, we've heard that funding mechanisms at a national level remain largely population-driven, and these provide limited scope to reflect the depth of need experienced here in Clackmannanshire. The result is recurring structural challenges that demand rigorous financial planning, strong transformation strategies, and careful risk management. The report highlights the substantial progress made by the Council in driving budget savings, and that's seen by the total savings of £74 million since 2010. But we've been trying to protect frontline delivery wherever possible. Yet, as members across the Chamber will appreciate, savings opportunities are diminishing, and many of the most obvious non-statutory efficiencies have already been taken. We also face significant pressures beyond our control. Wage inflation, rising demand for services, like I've said, such as social care and homelessness support. And these are coupled with the impact of flat funding settlements. The indicative funding gap over the next 5 years is stark and underlines the scale of the challenge ahead. And I think for these reasons, the report recommends that Council notes the background and the context of our fiscal and economic challenges, acknowledges the track record we have in delivering savings, transformation and collaboration, recognises the outlook ahead of the setting of the budget for this year, and prioritises, invests in and supports the key activities required to mitigate the pressures and improve financial sustainability. I think this includes a commitment to our medium-term financial strategy, further development of our financial resilience framework, and continuing to work with partners, stakeholders and government to secure sustainable funding. The paper lays out clearly the reality of where we are and where we are heading. It is evidence-based, it's honest, and it does set the foundation for the budget decisions we will take shortly. It does not shy away from the challenge, nor should we. It invites us as elected members to be bold, strategic and forward-looking in how we steward the public resources entrusted to us. I'm happy, therefore, to propose the paper and ask that all elected members note its findings and support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lindsay to second.
Thanks, Convener. And yeah, this is probably going to sound fairly repetitive given what Ellen's just outlined and also the discussion that we've had, but I think that reinforces the point that we need to continue to shout as loud as we can about our current context and how we can benefit greater going forward. We know we've got the smallest mainland local authority with the highest levels of need deprivation and other unique challenges. And in many ways, we have a very similar context to island authorities, but without some of the added benefits that are received there. The council isn't awash with additional revenue streams that are afforded to other local authorities, nor do we have the ability to benefit significantly from local levies, such as the visitor or parking levies that have been discussed. To put into context, obviously we utilise council tax as our major income revenue provider, and 1% of that generates a mere £289,000 for every, obviously, percent that we increase. I think there's no other figure that really puts into context more starkly than that 74 million that we've had to save over since 2010, 16 years. And considering our operating budget is 176 million. Now, what's more frightening is that I've been in this role for over half of that time, and I've certainly felt the pressure. I know officers that I've worked alongside feel that pressure. And we've really gone from that perspective, reflecting back on this over the last 8 or 9 years, the pages and pages of management efficiencies and policy savings that were presented to us, that has now narrowed to 1 page, 2 pages. It shows where we are, and it shows that we've nowhere else to go really, and we're really at the bare bones in terms of how we're operating as a council. Now, that said, we've painted a doom and gloom picture, and it is tough. But I'm not one, I know the council leader's not one to sit and ponder all the issues that we do have without trying to improve our position right our corner. And the council leader, as has been outlined through the questions that we've had, is very much on the front foot with this, trying to push our corner and trying to ensure that Clackmannanshire is front and centre of ministers in terms of trying to push that position for us. So our approach to collaboration partnership is obviously nationally recognised, and we must continue to build on this if we're to find a sustainable footing going forward. We have incredible officers, and we've got a committed council, and we've got an unwavering desire to deliver the best outcomes for Clackmannanshire, as shown through how we are prioritising and investing, and hopefully that will come through in the budget paper later today. Thanks.
Thank you. The paper's now open for debate. Councillor Rennie?
Yeah, and it's a fairly bleak position that we're in. I don't think there's a full understanding in the wider community in terms of how bleak the position is and how many of the factors that we're dealing with are out with our control. So some of the things that we've raised today within questioning that are things that we don't have control over as a council, but these are things that where we need to find money. And unfortunately, we're challenged in doing that. And we have had to make substantial savings, and unfortunately, that impacts again on communities. And they only see that, they can see the work that's going on that's positive. So one of the things I wanted to highlight in the paper is where it says Strive has previously suggested that savings across partners of 66 million for prevention is a really key figure. So the preventative work that we're doing, and particularly within the kind of work that we're doing with the promise and different areas like that, they were doing massive preventative work to ensure that the costs will be reduced further down the line. And maybe that's not been shown straight away, but that will eventually impact on our budgets going forward. So it's not that we're just sitting in our hands, we're trying to do lots as a council in terms, and cross-party. One thing I want to make it clear is that we work cross-party as a council. We don't stand on politics, which I think is really important when you're working in a small council such as this, that we do that. So, I mean, I think it is challenging, but I really recognise the efforts by officers, and even simple things like when we have a key post to recruit, because we can't afford to pay higher salaries that other councils can, we sometimes suffer from that. So we're not throwing money away. And I think it's really important to stress that. It's an area that I'm not happy to see, and none of us are, but unfortunately it's where we are, and I do recognise the level of savings that we've made over the years, but that's hard actually to get that level of savings, and unfortunately we didn't have any choice. So I think it's really important to get that message out that the council has not had any choice but to make these savings, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to balance our budgets. And we've seen in the discussion today about what happens when you can't balance your budget with the Health and Social Care Partnership. So essentially it ends up that there's additional costs we didn't anticipate. So it's really, really important that we do have a balanced budget, and it's really important that we have good financial stewardship, which we do have. So I think, you know, I'm noting this paper, but with regret in terms of where we're at.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coyne, to be followed by Councillor Harrison.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to add to what Janine said, with which I kind of must agree. I think the great thing about this paper is that it's embedded in it a great number of counter arguments to a lot of the adverse publicity that this council gets in social media. And I hope that from this point our comms team might get something together to try and dispel some of the myths that are out there and get some of these facts out in the public domain. People complain about rises in council tax. If only they knew, they would be horrified. So it's a great paper, a lot of work gone into it, and it tells a really important but rather sad story.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison, to be followed by Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, listen, first of all, thanks to Lindsay and the finance team and all other officers who have worked really hard on this budget, whether that was putting savings forward and other ideas. So yeah, thanks very much for all that. Understand how difficult it can be. Just probably picking up on what Councillor Rennie said there, that there are a whole host of things that people don't see that the council do. Council tax is obviously it'll be the headline grabber. It'll be the one that people go after, and I think it's important to note that what we are proposing today is the lowest we could possibly have gone. We couldn't have gone any further down the way without getting the council into real financial difficulties, more so than we are already in. But it's not just about council tax. For me, it's about jobs as well, and some of the services that people do see. So we have increased the money going towards roads. I'm sure every one of us have had a complaint about potholes, and we probably complain about them ourselves, so we are increasing that. But we're also looking to keep services such as land services, the street cleaning teams and the ranger services. So it is about securing employment in the area as well. And these are things that people see and feel every single day. They might not see and feel the health and social care thing unless they've got themselves or a family member who are involved through that. But I think it's really important to note that the work that's gone into looking at how can we secure services as well. So we have listened to residents. We've listened to residents about the cost of living crisis with the council tax being as low as we could possibly go, but also on the way that they feel their communities are with potholes, with land services, so yeah, I'm happy to be back in this paper. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, well, basically it's all been said, but it's just to say I thought that was a really good paper. It clarified the different elements that, you know, we're dealing with here. But I also would like to add on, and I know everyone in the chamber knows this, but I thought it'd be good to get it out there anyway. At the end, the sharp end of all these savings are human beings. And if we have to continue to do this, folk are really going to suffer because it's being spread thin. So back to reform again, and sorry, reforms that are required. We really, that needs to be done, you know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other contributions to the debate? No, Councillor Forster, you want this opportunity to sum up? No. Okay, so the paper asks us to note items that are listed from 2.1 to 2.4 and to agree to those at 2.5 to 2.7. I'm happy to approve the paper. Thank you. So item 4 is the target operating model, and Nicky's going to take us through that paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. This paper presents proposals to take further steps to implement the Council's Be the Future target operating model. These proposals are a fundamental enabler of our Be the Future transformation ambitions and aim to create a fit-for-purpose organisational design and structure which allows us to further embed a whole system focus on delivering outcomes and more joined up and sustainable service delivery models for the future. These proposals presented today represent a significant milestone for the Council. The proposals presented set out the design and initial structural changes needed to allow the Council to deliver and manage a mixed economy of service delivery models in line with the previously agreed Be the Future target operating model. Specifically, these proposals accelerate the Council's shift towards partnership as the default approach to the delivery of services. They are therefore inherently linked to many other aspects of our transformation work that are regularly separately reported to Council. They also aim to reflect some of the learning we have gained in our transformation work so far. Paper seeks approval of the refined target operating model and approval of the immediate state changes to the management structure to put in place leadership to develop new outcomes-focused management portfolios and role alignment. These proposals and changes to management roles have been made, generating a saving of between £70,650 and £127,587. This is in addition to the significant savings already made in the management costs since 2018. The paper highlights the importance of supporting a proper change programme of activity to steer the organisation through these changes. This was an area of investment which was severely disrupted for the 2018 proposals and is likely to have been a significant contributor to the effectiveness of that implementation process. Consultation and engagement will need to be a significant part of the further development, design and implementation of the target operating model going forward. In addition, there are significant additional work streams which need to be established to support the change, including leadership support, transforming the Council's performance management framework and realigning the workforce strategy, developing the corporate core functions, in support of outcomes and implementing a new deal with our staff to ensure that there is clarity over roles and expectations, as well as how staff will be supported. Paper clearly indicates that the model is not without risk, and a high-level evaluation and mitigation of key risks is also set out in the paper. It is important to note that adopting the proposed model is viewed as a lower risk option than maintaining the status quo. Finally, I would like to take the exceptional opportunity to thank my strategic directors, Chris, Kevin and Lorraine, who have worked collaboratively with me over several months to develop this proposal. The professionalism and objectivity with which the task has been embraced is very much appreciated, especially given the potential structural changes arising from this work. It is very clear that the delivery of positive, sustainable outcomes is a key driver for all of them. So thank you. I'd also like to thank Sharif, Fee and Ali for the work to develop the frameworks for performance management and our workforce, which will be key strands of our change programme if these proposals are agreed today. I'm happy to take any questions on the paper.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. Do we have any questions, Councillor Quine?
Thanks. Nikki, on page 40, 3.21, you've got an illustration of what the future state, what you're calling the future state. What will that feel like? I mean, how different will that feel than today?
Thank you, Councillor. So it's interesting you've happened on that particular exhibit because it's one that's attracted quite a bit of attention. So the purpose of that exhibit is to illustrate hypothetically what the future state could look like, reflecting that mixed economy. So the key message that I was looking to convey with that exhibit is that if you look at the different coloured blobs that sit at what's marked level 3+, the white represents those areas where the council may potentially continue to deliver those services completely. You've got in the peachy colour potentially commission services, and in the green boxes those that are partnership. What I would emphasise is though that this is illustrative. It's not the future design that's proposed because, as you will have noted from the paper, the next phase, beyond the one that council's been asked to agree to today, would be the point at which that was properly started to be designed out. So the outcomes portfolios will be critical in that space. As a consequence, if you don't mind, I'll just take the opportunity to mention, I know that there's been a little bit of concern raised that not all services are reflected in there. It was intended to be illustrative. There were a range of services not included in the diagram purposely. It was just meant to show the different types of delivery models that could be. The other thing that I would say is you will also know from having read the paper that the three options I've just given you in terms of the potential formats of those service delivery models are not the only ones that are mentioned in the paper. There are other ones too. Thank you.
Fine. Kind of looking at the thing holistically, we're on this side of the river, vision is on the other side of the river, and we need a plank to get across. Now that plank is our capacity to continue doing as we're doing and transform at the same time. Is the plank long enough?
I think that's a very good question. So there's no doubt that this is ambitious. However, I would also suggest it's necessary. We know that our current arrangements from both the design point of view for the way the council is organised, how our services want to access and experience services, but also what's going on externally. So in the previous item, there was a lot of discussion about the potential for public sector reform. That is increasingly driving us towards regional, partnership, collaborative models, even maybe into the Once for Scotland space too. So we need to ensure that we're match fit. So to allow us to do that, these proposals seek to take us in that direction to make sure that the organisation is able to accommodate those sorts of changes and be able to respond to the opportunities. But to do it, we will need to invest. So it is absolutely clear that this work will need to be supported by a proper, fully designed change programme. And we've already, I mean, you can see with the appendices on performance management, workforce and so on, we've already started work in that space. We didn't want to go too far, prejudging the outcome of today, but there will be, subject to approval today, the full programme of activity drawn out, and that will be then monitored and managed and reported through a combination of the Be the Future board and back into the council through the regular update reports you receive.
So in the summary, yes, you think a plank is long enough. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie.
Thanks very much, Chair. I stole my thunder again on model 3.21, but I'll just ask a follow-up question. So the two big glaring obvious gaps I noticed were education and social work. So I'm presuming that they'll fall under the wellbeing side.
So the two portfolios, if council agrees today, would be created. So correct what the wellbeing and the place and economy portfolio. The next step, though, will be to work out the outcomes-focused portfolio. So the services will not necessarily be described in the functional way that we currently describe them. I would expect that in the main, the outcomes that relate to wellbeing would report into the wellbeing director, and those for place and economy would report into the place and economy director. Having said that, I've been having discussions with the directors and saying there is an issue of workload. So we need to make sure there's a balance of workload, and actually directors that all management should be working across all of the outcomes. So it is not beyond the realms of possibility that people will be managing different things than where they've had the professional technical lines in the past.
So my other question was just on, obviously with my audit and scrutiny hat on, the partnership and performance role was really important for that. And we have had low assurance in the past, which is a real challenge for us as a committee, really to ensure, and also we're dealing with an environment where there's the potential of big IT failures or fraud or all sorts of different areas that significantly affect the council. Do you think that's going to leave any kind of gap?
The short answer would be no. I actually agree with you in terms of the absolute importance of those. And you'll notice from the paper that in recognition of that, the head of corporate services role will continue to report directly to me and will continue to be a member of the senior team. The key issue here is about how, if you're focusing on outcomes, how you align all of those tasks which will still need to be fulfilled, how they are aligned with the delivery of outcomes. So it was about that integration piece rather than about taking away or diminishing anything in terms of the roles. So all the same tasks will still be completed.
And I'm presuming we'll still have as much support as an audit and scrutiny committee moving forwards.
Yeah, that support might change in terms of who it is and when, depending on how this would feed through the implementation phases. But yes, I mean, obviously it's a standing committee of council, so absolutely that support will be there.
Thank you. Do we have any other quits? Sorry, Councillor McTaggart.
Thanks, convener. Given that this is approved today, Nikki, how soon do you see the implementation of this, and how? I know this is an impossible question to answer, but how soon do you think we can start to see benefits from this system?
First bit was a wee bit easier for me to answer than the second bit. So in terms of implementation, the specific elements that council's been asked to agree, the intention is to implement those rapidly. So the redesign of the roles and advertising of those redesigned roles through by the end of March, and appointments to those roles by the end of April. Obviously then the next phases will be subject to the progress with the design and development activity that needs to happen. The other thing I would say is, I mean, the paper sets out an implementation timeline of 24 to 36 months, but that's quite flexible because we would dial that up or down depending how rapidly we need to respond to either internal and external challenges and internal and external opportunities. So the pace will be dictated by some of the environmental factors. So for instance, if we found we were going more rapidly than we anticipate with the collaboration work, we would need to look at the organisational design implications of that more quickly than just waiting until we got through to the end of the 36 months. In terms of benefits, the benefits of this are tied into all of our transformation work, because I think probably I was thinking about this before the meeting today, and I think for me now this paper it represents a position where we're starting to bring together the Be the Future transformation programme and the design of the organisation, so that we're actually making it just how we do things. So that's what we're trying to deliver here. In terms of benefits, the clarity of roles for officers, the streamlined one front door access for our service users and communities, that's going to take a little longer, and the timing of that will be relative to bringing those individual pieces of work forward. But I would hope that you would start to see progress on the individual elements quite rapidly once we make the structural changes and the design changes about roles.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Councillor Coyne.
Thanks, Commissioner. It's just a clarification on page 42. Critical support area, bottom of the page. Point B says expected impact on the outcome, versus a counterfactual, and then it stops. I'm not quite sure what that's meant to mean. Page 42, bottom of the page. Point B, expected impact.
Yeah, that's all. Apologies, that's also repeated in the risks as well. Just trying to find the place, because I spotted that this morning, Councillor. I think what I was trying to convey there was the comparison of the known with the unknown, if that makes sense. So we've got the current position and we need to move to a position that we are anticipating. So that's the reference to the counterfactual bit. That will need to be flexible. So it's not it'd be the counterfactual. There's not necessarily a word missing. It's referring to it as a state, if that makes sense.
Fine.
Okay, thank you. Is there no other questions? Thanks, Nicky. Councillor Olsen to move the paper.
Thanks, convener. So in moving this report on the target operating model, I want to begin by directly referencing the paper we've just considered. The budget context and outlook report set out in stark and factual terms the financial reality facing Clackmannanshire Council. It outlined the sustained structural pressures, rising demand, limited flexibility and funding, and a medium-term outlook that requires difficult decisions. So if that paper answered the question, what are we doing? This paper answers the question, what are we going to do about it? The target operating model is our organisational response to the context that we have just acknowledged. It recognises that incremental efficiencies are no longer enough. We have already delivered substantial savings over many years, and the scale of future pressures means we must now redesign how we operate, and not just trim around the edges. The model outlined in the paper sets out a clear framework for how we will align our structural and to our statutory responsibilities and agreed priorities, reduce duplication and silo working, strengthen accountability and streamline management arrangements, embed digital transformation and smarter ways of working, and focus on prevention and early intervention wherever possible. I'd like to assure members that this is not change for change's sake. It is disciplined and necessary reform driven by the financial and demographic context described in the previous report. The budget context paper made clear that demand in areas such as social care, education support, homelessness and complex needs continues to rise. And if we are to protect frontline services in those high pressure areas, we must ensure that the organisation supporting them is efficient, focused and sustainable. And I believe the target operating model provides that structure. It also supports our medium-term financial strategy by ensuring that transformation is planned, governed and deliverable rather than reactive. I do want to be clear that this is not solely about reducing costs. It's about improving clarity, improving outcomes and ensuring that every pound spent delivers value to our communities. I think we all agree that change of this scale must be handled responsibly. Engagement with staff and trade unions will be critical. Implementation will be phased and monitored, but the direction is necessary and unavoidable if we are to maintain financial resilience. So the two papers before us today are therefore intrinsically linked. The budget context paper sets out the challenge, and the target operating model sets out the organisational response. And together they provide the foundation for the budget decisions that will follow. I therefore propose their support and ask that members support the continued implementation of the target operating model as an essential component of our long-term financial sustainability.
Thank you. Councillor Lindsay to second.
Was that intrinsically linked? It was intrinsically. Intrinsically. One of these two anyway. So yeah, just to add, I mean, the council has undergone significant changes outlined in the paper since 2018 in terms of the management structure, both in terms of internal transformation and external pressures. While the 2018 model delivered important financial savings and introduced more integrated leadership arrangements, the operating context has continued to evolve considerably. Cumulative impact of sustained financial pressure, increased service demand, increased emphasis on public sector reform, and a growing focus on partnership working means that the current structure no longer fully supports the ambitions of the organisations. The paper presents a response to the challenges to ensure the council remains financially sustainable, outcome focused, and capable of delivering high quality services within a constrained funding envelope. The proposed model aims to strengthen leadership accountability for outcomes, clarifies governance arrangements, and embeds collaboration and partnership as core principles of how the council looks to operate. Now, importantly, the paper recognises that structural reform alone is insufficient. The accompanying focus on performance management, workforce strategy, and leadership development demonstrates a comprehensive approach to organisational change. The proposals will aim to improve transparency, accountability, and importantly, consistency across the organisation. And now, at a time when Council must continue to identify efficiencies, it is appropriate to scrutinise all aspects, including senior management costs, alongside other areas of expenditure. And the proposed changes deliver further savings while also addressing sustainability risks associated with leadership capacity and resilience at senior management level. Now, overall, these proposals provide clear strategic direction for the next stage of the Council's transformation journey, and they position the organisation to strengthen partnership working, support community empowerment, and deliver a whole systems approach to the delivery of our outcomes, but while operating within the available resources. Now, as Nicky's outlined as well, I think we're also conscious of the sensitivity around this particular paper and the way that officers have went about constructing the paper, given the implications it may have on themselves. And again, we're not lost on that, and appreciate the work that's gone into this paper objectively to present the recommendations as they've done. I'm supportive of the recommendations and happy to second. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The paper's now open for debate. Does anybody wish to debate? Councillor Venny?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it's a good move forward to look at not being silos working and working across different portfolios. And I like the term wellbeing when we're looking at it as well. I think that's really positive. And we couldn't, I've said it since the beginning, we just couldn't just keep doing things that we'd done before. We had to look at different change. But only concern, as I said, I mean, I'm going to vote for the paper, but obviously as in the partnership and performance side, obviously I've worked really closely with the partnership and performance team over the years. Very positively, I have to say. They have been absolutely excellent, and I hope we'll keep an eye on this moving forward to make sure that that doesn't fall away a bit. So just to monitor it and ensure that we're keeping moving forward in that area.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Thanks, Commissioner. If I may dare to summarise the paper as seeking to maximise value for money and effort. And I think if that does describe it fairly accurately, I think that then there's no reason it doesn't get the support of everyone. I mean, who could fly against that ambition?
Thank you. Any other contributions? No. Councillor Forster, opportunity to sum up at all? No. Okay. So the paper asks us to agree to the proposed Be the Future target operating model, which is set out in Appendix A, to the implementation of the immediate state changes to the management structure, which is also set out in Appendix A, to delegate authority to the Chief Executive in consultation with group leaders, in accordance with agreed council procedures, to implement the immediate state management changes, excluding any elements that require a formal interview process, and to agree to delegate to Chief Executive in consultation with group leaders as appropriate authority to progress transitional management arrangements, including consultation with potential partners where service vacancies exist. And we're also asked to note consequentials from 2.5 to 2.9. Are we happy to agree to the payment? Okay, thank you. Item 5 is the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. And Lindsay will take us through that paper. Thank you.
Thank you. So in accordance with the Treasury Management Code of Practice and the Prudential Code, local authorities are required to prepare an annual Treasury Management Strategy Statement that includes key prudential indicators which are set out in this report for consideration and approval. The strategy and indicators set out how the Council will manage its borrowing, investments and cash flows to support delivery of the proposed 20-year capital programme included with the Revenue and Capital Budget 26-27, also included on this agenda. The programme includes a significant level of investment in the early years to support key priorities such as the learning estate, wellbeing hub and digital transformation. As a result, the Council will see increased borrowing in the short to medium term as set out in Chart 1, Section 5 of the report. The ratio of cost of borrowing to revenue funding shown in Table 2 is a key indicator to determine whether this borrowing is affordable. The ratio, which is currently below the Scottish average, increases as borrowing increases, but starts to reduce again in the second half of the 20-year capital programme. The strategy also sets out the Council's policy on borrowing in advance of need and debt rescheduling opportunities. Section 3 sets out the strategy for investments and prospects for interest rates, and our policy remains firmly focused on security and liquidity first. Table 7 shows the forecasted slow downward trend in interest rates for both borrowing and investments from March 26, and Appendix B sets out the Council's investment portfolio as at 31st of January. The level of available cash balances, interest and borrowing rates and the need to borrow is a focus of continual review to minimise the cost of borrowing of current and future investment, and regular Treasury updates will be provided throughout the year to ensure effective oversight and scrutiny. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. Do we have any questions? Councillor Coyne?
Thanks, Convener. A simple one, I think, Lindsay, page 56, 4.1, the policy for the statutory repayment of debt. How residual capital expenditure, what's it residue from? Sorry, page 56.
Sorry. Sorry, Chair. If there's a point in return to 56, is that not the people that was disagreed?
No.
Chuck sand and mentions.
The second bullet point on 4.1 you're talking about.
It is,
Yeah.
It talks about residual capital. What's the residue from?
I suppose it's just the terminology used. It's probably not. It's more technical than friendly in the terms of, if I can explain it like that. So what it's trying to say there. So the statutory repayment of debt, how the residual capital expenditure. So If we remove the word residual, which I will do for future, it's just around the capital expenditure, so how they charge that to revenue over time. So it's kind of drip feeding the capital expenditure. So as that is repaid over each year, it's the residual of that that's left to be repaid. So once part of it's repaid. So through our loans fund, we repay that capital expenditure as such over a period of time rather than in 1 year or in 2 years, and it's smoothed out. So the residual is kind of the reducing balance of what's still to be repaid.
Understood. Thank you. Next question, with your permission, page 59 now. Table 2, ratio of cost of borrowing. The question is, what's the error tolerance in these calculations? I mean, I did a wee experiment doing a plus or minus 10%, and you're 6.89% in 2035-36 moves between 5.6 and 8.4. So that begs the question, what would be the tipping point for it being deemed unaffordable? And I've assumed a 10% tolerance in that. So what tolerance are you accepting in that? And what would be the tipping point?
Thank you. So ultimately, it comes down what we can afford in the revenue budget, and that's what we in. But we try to keep aligned with the Scottish average, so we don't want to be an outlier on that, and that is effectively our key of what's what we would like to keep it at. We wouldn't like to go, but we could probably go 1%, 2% above that, but keeping it within that couple of percentage point value. But ultimately, when we do that ratio, it's working out what the charges are and whether we can put that and afford that within our revenue programme. So ultimately, that is our test for that. But as I said, we would try to keep the indicator in line with the Scottish average, so we don't become an outlier, and anything over 2%, I'd say, would be something that would flag a risk to us, that we would try and bring that down.
And the first half of the question was, what's the error tolerance in your spreadsheet for the data running till 2045-46?
Sorry, could you expand on that a bit further for me?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when you're doing these projections, you're guessing basically, and you must have an idea, I guess, of what the maximum or the minimum might be. So you'll pick a figure in the middle for the spreadsheet. I'm just wondering how wide the tolerance gap is, because obviously, if the tolerance swings completely to one side, then you, as I say, your 6.89 becomes 8.4, which is 2% above your Scottish average. So it's bordering on hitting the tipping point. So I'm just wondering if your tolerances were comfortable in that context.
Thank you. So I appreciate the explanation around that. I can understand what the question being asked, but because we have the assumptions in our projections, so this is based on what our general revenue funding would be, what our council tax might be, so we have assumptions built into that. So on an annual basis, we review those assumptions. So we don't really set a tolerance going out into future years. We review that on an annual basis. So if, for example, next year we looked at it in 2044-45 was higher, maybe that 2% that I mentioned in the last question, then we would look to try and bring that down by adjusting the investment in the capital programme or smoothing that out again. So we don't tend to look at that tolerance within the future years because it's our fixed assumptions at that time, and we review them annually.
Yeah, I mean, and don't take this the wrong way. So that means basically the figures to the right-hand side of the graph are sort of bordering on meaningless.
I would disagree that they're meaningless. They're based on the current assumptions, which is the best information we know at the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, that's just now.
Do you have any other questions?
Back to me.
Back to
Okay. Yeah, 7.4 on page 60. Talking about the training sessions, just wondering if that's been booked and when that might happen, because that's something pretty important.
So we don't have any training sessions scheduled at this time, but we are looking to provide one during the financial year. And we're speaking to our Treasury consultants within next week. So we're looking to identify some dates there and then obviously put them out to members to see if there's the uptake for those dates. It's quite difficult, as you can imagine, to try and get a date that suits everybody, but we'll try and offer that. Just a refresher, because I'm conscious it has been a while since that's been delivered.
Might I suggest that you don't actually require all 18 councillors to be there, because generally speaking, people will sort into silos of preference, and it might be, and a quorum perhaps for people to be treasury management savvy might be half a dozen, 4 or 5, you know. So if you got an interest from people who are keen to take part in the training, that might be enough to be able to get a date earlier.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'll take that on board and just put out an initial ask to who would be interested, and then try and get dates that suit that. Maybe reduce them.
Excellent.
Do you have any others, Councillor Coyne?
I'm not Holland.
Any other questions from anybody else? No. Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Councillor Forson to move the paper.
Yep, thanks, convener. So following our earlier discussions on the budget context and the target operating model, this paper demonstrates something I think is very essential, that alongside transformation and difficult choices, Clackmannanshire Council continues to manage its finances with discipline, professionalism and prudence. I think, as we've just seen from the questions, it's a very technical paper, but ultimately Treasury management is about how we manage borrowing, investments and cash flow. It's about safeguarding public money while ensuring we can continue to invest in vital infrastructure. There are 2 points in the report I believe are particularly important to highlight, and the first is our investment performance. Despite ongoing market volatility, the Council continues to achieve a strong and responsible return on its temporary investments. Crucially, this is delivered within a strategy that prioritises security and liquidity over yield and in line with the CIPFA code. We are not taking undue risks to chase high returns. Instead, we are balancing performance with prudence, and the returns achieved reflect careful Treasury management rather than speculative exposure, and they've helped our financial position over the past years. The second area I'd like to highlight is our borrowing position. Our level of borrowing remains below the Scottish Local Authority average when measured per head of population, and I think that's quite a significant point. It demonstrates that while we continue to invest in schools, roads and community infrastructure, we are doing so in a way that does not overburden the Council with debt relative to our peers. In other words, our capital investment programme is ambitious, but it is also proportionate and affordable. The prudential indicators set out in this report confirm that borrowing remains within sustainable limits, financing costs remain manageable as a proportion of revenue, and our exposure to interest rate is actively monitored and controlled. Members will know that interest rates movements over recent years have increased the importance of timing and structure in our borrowing decisions, and the strategy before us today provides officers with clear parameters while maintaining flexibility to respond to market conditions. So taken together, this report reinforces a key message. Even in the face of significant budget pressures, this Council remains financially responsible. We are not over-leveraged. We are generating appropriate returns on investments, and we are operating within a clear governance framework. I'd like to thank Lindsay, our Section 95 officer, and the finance team for the detailed work that underpins this strategy. And convener, unfortunately, good Treasury management rarely makes headlines, but it does underpin everything we do. It protects services, it supports capital investment, and it safeguards the public purse. I'm therefore happy to propose the Treasury management strategy and ask members to approve the recommendations as set out.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lindsay to second.
Yeah, just to fully endorse, and I really don't have much more to add. I think that covers everything, but I think you know, that idea that we don't tend to see this in the public domain in terms of being debated in terms of the financial management of the council. Quite often it's the opposite. But this paper shows the way that the council manages its funding appropriately, and it's enabled us to invest in our biggest infrastructure project, and we'll talk more about this in the next paper, that we've ever invested in, and that's as a result of sound financial management and enabling ourselves to be able to borrow to deliver that and be able to sustain payments going forward interest-wise. So yeah, I think council leaders absolutely nailed the context around this, the sound financial management that exists, and you know the ability to invest going forward as a result of that. So just to put my endorsement to that as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Paper's open for debate. Does anybody wish to debate? No. Okay, so the paper asks us to note the information contained within the report, to note the continuation of the borrowing strategy to support continued capital investment, which is captured at paragraph 5.6. To note the investment portfolio position as at 31st of January 2026, which is Appendix B, and asks us to approve the Treasury Management Strategy Statement 26-27 and the prudential indicators for the years 26-27 to 28-29 attached as Appendix A in compliance with prudential code requirements. We're happy to approve. Thank you. Colleagues, I know it's slightly earlier than scheduled, but I'm going to call for a comfort break for 10 minutes before we move on to the last item.
No.